People have known the pros and cons of electric cars for a long time. Their story began more than a century ago. Gasoline engines weren't seen as the obvious choice in Europe or the United States. While combustion cars rattled, smoked, and needed constant care, electric ones glided quietly through the streets. Simple, reliable, and almost silent. By the end of the 19th century, Europe and the United States were building just as many electric cars as gasoline ones. But today's story isn't about the West. It's about another chapter of that history. Soviet electric cars. Almost forgotten, yet remarkable in their own way. Before we talk about Soviet electric cars, it's worth remembering that the idea of electric transport in Russia appeared long before the Soviet Union. In 1899, an Odessa nobleman and engineer named Hippolyte Romanov built the first 3 Russian electric cars, 2 of which were front-wheel drive. The first model, a leisure carriage designed for wealthy passengers, appeared in March 1899. It had an open body with a 2-seat bench, a folding roof, and side windows. A year later, Romanov built a second version with a closed, glassed body and a front door. Structurally, these cars resembled London cabs. The driver sat behind and higher than the passengers. 2 electric motors with a combined output of about 4 to 6 horsepower drove the front wheels. Quite a bold solution for that time. In 1900, Romanov introduced an electric omnibus that could carry 15 passengers. It had a soft suspension and comfortable longitudinal benches. 8 batteries were installed under the floor, powering 2 6-horsepower motors. The new vehicle was met with enthusiasm, but the project stalled due to a lack of funds. In 1901, when the city council granted permission to open 10 omnibus routes, all expenses were placed on Romanov himself. Without government support, the project became impossible to sustain, and the inventor returned to Odessa empty-handed. Now let's move to the 1930s, to the Soviet Union. It was a difficult time, but that's when the story of Soviet electric cars began. By then, electric cars in the West were already losing popularity. Gasoline vehicles were developing fast, and few people still believed that electric traction had a future. In the USSR, the idea returned for more practical reasons. The country was industrializing, but oil production and infrastructure were lagging behind. Gasoline was considered a strategic resource. It was mainly reserved for the army and agriculture. Electricity, on the other hand, was spreading much faster. Power plants were being built, tram lines expanded, and the subway appeared. Under those conditions, electric vehicles seemed like a logical choice for urban use. The first Soviet electric cars were garbage trucks. At the Laboratory of Electric Traction of the Moscow Power Engineering Institute, engineers built 2 electric garbage trucks on the chassis of the Ford AA, which was produced in the USSR. Instead of a gasoline engine, the engine bay housed batteries that powered electric motors mounted under the cab. In 1935, under the supervision of Professor Victor Resenford and engineer Yuri Galkin, another version appeared, this time based on the larger ZIS-5 truck. This 2-ton electric truck was also used for garbage collection. Behind the cab, there were 40 batteries with a capacity of 168 amp-hours and a total weight of about 1.4 tons. They powered a 13-kilowatt motor, roughly equal to 18 horsepower. The vehicle weighed around 4.2 tons and could carry 2 garbage containers with a total load of up to 1.8 tons. That same year, the Dynamo factory presented another electric truck, based on the 5-ton YAG-4. It was equipped with a 60-kilowatt electric motor, and its 1.5-ton battery pack could be charged right at stops using contact poles, much like a trolley bus. Unfortunately, very little data about these vehicles has survived. It's only known that very few were built, and none went into mass production. Then came the Second World War, and the topic of electric cars lost its relevance around the world. After the war, though, it returned, this time out of necessity. Fuel was in critically short supply. The country needed transport to rebuild, but the oil industry hadn't yet recovered from the war. Lend-Lease had ended, relations with the West had soured, and the USSR was left without external fuel supplies. Electric traction once again seemed like a solution. It was decided to use it for vehicles not involved in key sectors. For example, postal service trucks. In 1947, NAMI developed two electric postal vans, the NAMI 750 and 751, with payload capacities of 500 and 1,500 kilograms respectively. They looked almost identical, differing mainly in motor power, 3.2 kilowatts for the 750 and 6 kilowatts for the 751. Each rear wheel had its own electric motor. The first 6 vans were assembled in Moscow, 3 of each type. Production was then moved to Lvov, to the plant that would later become famous as the Laz Bus Factory. There, 10 examples of each version were built and sent for testing across various regions of the country. This approach, producing small pilot batches for real-world testing, was standard practice in the USSR. The vehicles were sent to the people. Feedback was collected from drivers and mechanics, and only then was the decision made whether to start full-scale production. The test results were average. Range was around 50 to 65 kilometers, and no more than 45 to 50 when fully loaded. Production costs turned out to be roughly twice as high as those of gasoline-powered trucks, like the Gaz AA and Gaz M415. When the atomic era began, the Ministry of Medium Machine Building required massive amounts of lead for the nuclear program. The metal quickly became far more valuable than gasoline. As a result, the charming NAMI postal vans remained nothing more than an experimental batch. The next time the advantages of electric cars were remembered in the USSR was in the mid-1960s, when a new wave of interest in small city cars began in the West. This happened long before the oil crisis of 1973. During the 1950s and 1960s, car ownership in Europe and the United States grew at an explosive rate. Cities were choking with traffic jams and smog, and more people were saying that society needed small and efficient cars, not just 5-meter cruisers. In the USSR, there were no problems with fuel or congestion. Gasoline was cheap, and the oil industry was running at full capacity. Still, the idea of compact city cars appeared, partly from a desire to keep up with global automotive trends, and also because it was easier to fill the market with subcompacts than with full-size vehicles. In the summer of 1969, the Moscow Automobile and Road Institute, together with designers and engineers from the All-Union Institute of Technical Aesthetics, developed a concept for a personal electric car. The car was designed for 2 adults and 2 children. Its estimated top speed was about 65 kilometers per hour, and the range reached up to 95 kilometers. The project looked quite realistic, but it was considered premature at the time. The electric car remained only on drawings and scale models. The idea of compact electric cars wasn't abandoned in the Soviet Union. In 1970, the Kaliningrad Research Institute of Electric Transport introduced a new project, a small electric microcar, built using components from the SMZ microcar and the Zaporozhets. It was a 2-seater vehicle with a curb weight of 720 kilograms and a 4.4 kilowatt motor. The car could reach a top speed of 60 kilometers per hour and cover up to 100 kilometers on a single charge. Despite these respectable figures, the project went no further, most likely for practical reasons. The country simply saw no real need for such a vehicle. Compact cars were still in demand, but this one was too compact and only had 2 seats. The Kaliningrad engineers didn't stop there. Later the same year, they built a small delivery van with a plastic body, designated EM0466. It could carry up to 500 kilograms of cargo, while its own weight reached 1.7 tons, 720 kilograms of which were taken up by the batteries. The design featured silver zinc batteries, an AC motor with aluminum windings, and a thyristor-based power control system. This setup provided a range of up to 100 kilometers, an impressive result for its time. Even though the country clearly needed light delivery vans, the EM0466 never entered mass production. The reasons were familiar: high cost and the lack of a proper manufacturing base for large-scale output. This van, however, did make it into newsreels of that era, which means we can still see it in motion today, not just in photographs. The Kaliningrad team didn't give up. In 1972, together with engineers from Estonia, they came up with their next project, this time an 8-seat minibus. The story behind this vehicle turned out to be quite fascinating. If more photos or footage had survived, it could easily have been the subject of a separate full-length video. But since only a few materials remain, I'll tell it here, as part of this story. In the early 1970s, one of the Estonian motor depots ran into a problem that was common across the entire Soviet Union. There were no light or medium-duty delivery vans. The only available options were the mid-sized trucks from Gaz and ZIL, which most of the time drove around half empty. The UAZ vehicles that could have filled that gap were mainly allocated to the Army, emergency services, and agriculture. Only if something was left over did a few reach civilian organizations, which, as you can guess, almost never happened. So the management of that Estonian motor depot decided they had had enough. They would build their own truck. At the time, building your own car in the USSR wasn't just allowed. In some cases, it was even encouraged. I've already covered that topic in my video about homemade Soviet cars. You'll find the link in the pinned comment. That's how the ET-600 mini-truck was born. It was built surprisingly well, a custom chassis, an engine from the Zaporozhets, a lightweight fiberglass cab, and a frame made of rectangular steel tubing. Most importantly, it had front-wheel drive, which makes the ET-600 a real contender for the title of the first Soviet front-wheel drive vehicle. The result was a light, nimble, and reasonably powerful little truck, perfect for city deliveries. Its creators firmly rejected the word homemade. They considered the ET-600 a small series factory product, and with good reason. Several dozen of these vehicles were built. The Kaliningrad Institute soon heard about the Estonian truck and decided it would make a great base for a new project. They called it ET-800, Electra. Project leader Vadim Petersky had an ambitious goal: to build a hybrid vehicle with no limits on driving range. The design used a gasoline engine from the ZAZ 966, working together with an electric motor. A large nickel-cadmium battery, 24 volts, allowed the ET-800 to drive up to 80 kilometers at speeds of up to 60 kilometers per hour. When the charge dropped or extra power was needed, the gasoline engine would start and recharge the batteries. That was the idea, but they still had to build a working prototype. Getting permission to produce it turned out to be difficult. Even the management of the Estonian motor depot wasn't sure it was worth the risk. Still, the project was approved, especially since the funding came from Moscow. According to the creators, the cost of the prototype was comparable to 3 brand-new Moskviches. It took 14 months to build, and after its presentation in Moscow, the vehicle left a positive impression. The Soviet Minister of Electrical Engineering, Alexei Antonov, promised to fund a small production batch. Then, unexpectedly, the chairman of the Estonian Council of Ministers, Walter Klausen, opposed the idea, claiming the republic lacked the specialists and resources for such a project. The work was frozen, though Antonov insisted that road tests be carried out. The tests lasted a little over a month and would have gone on longer if not for problems with the electrical system. The main issue was the low efficiency of the batteries, which tended to overheat. In the end, the Electra remained a one-off prototype, and unfortunately, it hasn't survived to this day. The Kaliningrad team didn't stop there. In 1972, there was new hope. Plans appeared to produce 100 half-ton electric delivery vans. The project was developed by the Moscow Research Institutes of Automotive Transport and Electromechanics, joined by the Kaliningrad Institute. At the first stage, 2 versions were planned. The first used a 10-kilowatt DC motor. The second, a 15-kilowatt AC motor. Heavy lead-acid batteries were placed under the cargo floor in 2 removable blocks that could be rolled out on casters and quickly replaced. Between them sat the electric motor with a drive shaft that sent power to the rear axle borrowed from the Volga Gaz-24. The body was designed with the help of engineer and stylist Yuri Dolmatovsky. A light frame structure with aluminum panels, sliding side doors, a rear ramp, and even an option for either left or right-hand drive. The first 7 vehicles, assembled at the experimental plant in Oriol between 1971 and 1974, turned out to be too heavy, about 2.2 tons, with a range of around 80 kilometers and a top speed of 60 kilometers per hour. Later, the Apsheronsk experimental plant built 10 lighter vans. Starting in 1975, 8 of them were used in one of the Moscow region's vehicle fleets. These vans were fitted with a thyristor control unit and a 21-kilowatt DC motor. They weighed about 2 tons, had a range of roughly 80 kilometers, and could reach speeds of up to 70 kilometers per hour. Without charging stations and on poor roads, the electric vans proved helpless and were no match even for the older gas trucks. The project was eventually deemed impractical and shut down. All these projects were created not at car factories, and often not even at specialized enterprises. But what about the real plants, the ones that had proper design departments and qualified specialists? Car factories also tried to build electric vehicles. In Ulyanovsk, for example, in 1974, together with a research institute, engineers built several electric vans based on the 1-ton UAZ 452. These half-ton trucks were powered by a 15-kilowatt electric motor that drove the rear wheels, while the front part of the body housed heavy lead-acid batteries. With a total weight of 2.4 tons, the vans turned out to be too heavy for efficient use. A few years later, Ulyanovsk produced 10 improved vehicles, the UAZ 451MI. They were fitted with AC motors and an onboard charging system that could plug directly into the power grid. The batteries were placed in containers under the frame, keeping the cargo area free, but the total weight grew to 3 tons. Payload capacity was almost gone, and the design was abandoned. Further refinements led to the UAZ 3801, one of the few Soviet electric vehicles that could be called relatively successful. In the early 1980s, the factory built a batch of 65 of these vans. Each had a 15-kilowatt AC motor and could carry up to 800 kilograms of cargo. The batteries were placed in a separate compartment inside the body. This reduced payload, but improved balance and reliability. These vans went through pre-production testing in Moscow's vehicle fleets. No detailed reports survived, but since the project didn't move forward, it's safe to assume that the fuel savings didn't outweigh the drawbacks: low payload and limited range compared to gasoline-powered UAZ models. After that, the Ulyanovsk plant never returned to the topic of electric vehicles. The Bukhanka itself is still alive today. As of 2025, it's still in production. I think it's about time to make a separate video telling its full story. There's one Soviet electric car that many people have probably seen before, especially those over 30 who remember the footage from the 1980 Moscow Olympics. The Riga bus factory had been experimenting with electric vehicles since the mid-1970s, though not very successfully. The problems were the same as everywhere else: weight, range, and the batteries themselves. Still, the Riga engineers managed to build a small batch of 6 RAF 2910 vehicles, made specifically for the 1980 Olympics. These were 5-seater electric cars for judges, used during marathon runs, race walking, and cycling events. Electric drive made it possible to follow the athletes without polluting the air with exhaust gases. The 10-kilowatt motors gave them a top speed of about 40 kilometers per hour, perfectly fine for their Olympic duties. After the Games, all 6 vehicles were handed over to various electrical engineering institutes. One of them went to the All-Union Institute of Current Sources in Ashgabat, where it was fitted with solar panels covering 8 square meters and equipment for charging the batteries. It could fully recharge in a single day of sunlight. The later fate of these cars varied. Some ended up in museums, others were lost. Now, for a bit of conspiracy, which we all secretly enjoy. At the Riga factory, there were rumors about 2 special vehicles, with luxury interiors and a body narrowed by 150 millimeters. According to the stories, these vans were built for use in secret underground tunnels beneath Moscow, meant for party officials and foreign guests. For years, it was thought to be nothing more than an urban legend, no photos, no evidence. But in October 2023, an ad suddenly appeared in Russia offering one of those very vehicles for sale. A RAF with a narrower body and every sign of being one of those secret electric cars. Over time, its batteries were replaced with a regular gasoline engine, and that's how it survived to this day. If the seller doesn't ask for an absurd price, there's a good chance this unique RAF will end up in good hands, be restored, and take its place in a collection or museum. Of course, these were far from all the electric cars built in the Soviet Union. There were attempts to make an electric Zaporozhets, and by the late 1980s, engineer Gennady Kainov created a tiny city EV called Limpopo. There were experiments in Armenia, too. But the time for electric cars simply hadn't come yet. The technology just wasn't there to compete with gasoline vehicles. And in the USSR, for many engineers, the very idea of developing EVs seems strange. Why spend time on a raw and uncertain technology when you could improve the good old internal combustion engine? And it's hard to blame them. They had no reason to switch to electric drive. Unlike the West, the Soviet Union never faced a fuel crisis, at least not until the very end of the 1980s, when the country itself was already collapsing. Gasoline was dirt cheap, cheaper than bottled water. Truck and bus drivers often carried a hose and a bucket to, don't fall off your chair, drain out the extra fuel. If a driver used 10 liters less than the daily norm, it was considered a bad sign. Maybe he was slacking off or even sleeping under a tree instead of working. So they'd simply pour the excess fuel out into the grass, just to make the paperwork match. Fleet managers acted the same way. As long as the fuel consumption targets were met, everyone was happy. Fuel economy existed only on paper. In reality, gasoline was plentiful and almost nobody cared. In that environment, developing electric cars looked pointless, even foolish. Some drivers said, "Why waste time on nonsense? Just fix the cars we already have." And there were technical problems too. All Soviet electric cars used lead-acid batteries, heavy, short-lived, and with very little capacity. They were fine for use in factories or warehouses, where gasoline engines couldn't be used. That's where electric vehicles actually found their place. For example, the Moaz plant made perhaps the only truly successful Soviet electric vehicle. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. You forgot to mention the Lada electric cars. Don't worry, that's going to be a separate video. And that's where we'll wrap it up for today. I hope you enjoyed this story. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a comment, and if you can, consider supporting the channel. To everyone who already does, thank you so much. See you soon.